Hey, welcome everyone, I'm Agent Coco, and today we will be looking at an introduction to XML. Now, XML is, at least in Isaac, it is used to define the content you want to add into the game. Um, Now, XML is pretty basic, it's easy to learn and understand, but we'll need to go over the basics. So first, what is XML used in general? Well, XML is usually used as a tool to register objects and classes in general with outside of the main source. Like for example, in Isaac, you register, for example, items.xml, which is the item class with several objects inside, which define basically the contents. Now you can recreate uh, similar things in Lua, for example. Let's take a look at my mod. I have a class setup which does a similar thing. However, using XML, while it's not supported as custom things in a modding API, I don't think so. It's still, well, first of all, mandatory for modding Isaac, but in games in general, it's a very useful tool for precisely avoiding this sort of stuff and making it more efficient and better overall to manipulate objects. Now, in terms of Isaac, it's just to register contents of the game, and to do that, you'll need to learn how to actually operate with the language, because while it's easy, it's just not like the easiest thing also to pick up if you don't have a clue. So we'll be going over the basics. First off is the tags. Now XML works by using tags to basically register everything there is. So to start a tag, you need to use these keys, or I don't actually know what they're called. You need to put them like this. You see how it's one pointing to the left and one pointing to the right. And to close it is a symbol of doing the same thing and putting a slash in between. If you ever coded in, I don't know, a language like HTML, which I'm really sorry if you have, it's very similar to that in the terms of tags. Now, in general, you won't be just doing this, right? You will need to put a name on your tag. So let's make our tag something like unique tag. Now you want to put here, you can just do like this and close it. Sorry, and close it. But you can also write values in between, like, and this will be the name of your tag. It heavily depends on how you register your what's the word, translation in your source code. So that's the basic thing of tags. You want to have these keys and put your tag name in between. So tag name, and to close it you want to do the same thing, put a slash and your tag name. It's just as easy as that. Now in terms of attributes, you can actually put attributes in tags. If you can see here in the items.xml, this is what it basically does. It doesn't have objects or anything, it's just more attributes into the tag. So let's imagine I want to make like an enemy. I create this tag and close it like this. But you can't just write here like attribute 1 equals this. No, that's, well, depending on how you make your translation code, you can do that, I think, but it's way better in every sense to just add your attributes in here. Like, let's say HP equals 20. Now in here, in this space, you want to put something more unique. We'll see later. For example, let's say you want your enemy to have a custom pathfinding function. Well, your enemy has 20 HP, your enemy has, let's say, velocity mold, and it's like super fast, 1.5 speed. Now here you want to select the pathfinding option, for example, pathfinding 1. And that's basically the gist of it. So you register the tag, and you put attributes inside so your source code can read it more easily. And what you put in between is what the object is actually going to do. These are attributes, this is a function. So in terms of formatting is really easy in XML. There's just, as far as I'm concerned, there's just two ways of formatting. Sorry if my voice is pretty weird, I haven't slept in a while, so my tongue is all sleepy. So my words will not be so easy to understand, so sorry about that. Anyway, formatting is super easy. As you say, there's two main types of formatting. There's objects, not objects, tags, which is this, and then there's attributes, which is just like this. It's super easy. It's just the tag goes in between the keys, and the attributes go in between the tags. Not in between the tags, inside the tags. And the formatting is really easy. It's just like registering a string in Lua. You write the variable name, then an equal, then put your variable in quotes. Now you need to put the quotes. If you want, for example, an attribute like damage, you can't just do this. This is going to error. You need to write the damage as a string, and then in your code, in the main game, you translate it to an actual number. But here it's just like the basis. Now in terms of objects, now that you've seen the basis, hopefully you can understand more or less how it works. If you don't, we'll still explain a bit further with the object system. So let's say you want to create a new class. Now the class, what will be? A player class. So let's say you want to register a player class, and you got the main thing. Sorry, players. This is your class. You can even put something like here, like name equal player class, and you will be able to distinguish this in your code as player class. Now, of course, what is a player class if you don't add any player? So let's add a player and close the player tag. You want your player to have some attributes. Now you could do stuff like this, HP 20 HP, but in this case you could just add it in here as an attribute. Now you see what I'm doing here. I'm not an expert in XML. I know the basics, but I'm not a super expert. You can do this, and maybe it's easier to translate in code. Maybe it's easier to translate in code if you add it as an attribute. I personally would prefer, depending on how it goes, I think it would be more comfortable to place specific stuff as objects, as you'll see later. So let's say you want it to have 20 HP, and you want it to have, let's say, what, like bombs, 2 bombs. You want it to have 55 money, and that's about it. Well, of course you need the player to have a name. And well, you got this set up. Now what you want to do is an object. What is this object going to be? Well, something more unique that you really can't just place inside the tag. For example, let's say you want it to have an ability. So ability, well, let's call it passive. Here you can just register passives on your main code and say you want the passive to be extra damage, and this will create a hook into the source code, which will create, like, it will trigger an effect attached to this function. You could do it like this. And so in the source code, let's say I have sorry, I don't have the main.lua open. So let's say here in the source code you had this function. You can run this function by saying and this is your function. You can also just make the passive be like let's say flag damage and amount equals 5, and here you create a hook to cache evaluation, which in here now this object gets called from here. This is what gets called into the function depending on how you set it up, and basically it adds the amount into the object. It's not great science. If you're actually trying to follow, it should be easier to understand. I'm trying to explain myself here, but as I said earlier, I'm not an XML expert. This is what I learned from modding Isaac and One Step from Eden. This is basically how it works. It creates a hook into the main code, which you can use to automate your functions. If you optimize your code good enough in here, you can basically just handle every single item as an XML object without having to update thing by thing in the main code, which is again similar to what I did here, which is create all of these attributes that handle the mod on its own. But here you can do it more easily from the XML. The XML. Now that's mainly what it is. It's objects and tags. You use tags for attributes you want and objects for more niche stuff that just doesn't fit here. Because for example, if I was to add a passive here, for example, the first example I said that was passive, was it something like extra damage? This you could actually add as an attribute up here, because it's just one thing. You add passive equal extra damage, and that's about it. It's really easy. Now, if you still don't understand, I highly recommend you go back. I know I'm being all over the place. I'm sorry, I'm trying to explain myself the best I can, but I'm kinda tired, and I'm not an expert, at least in this language. But anyway, if you still don't understand, I highly recommend you go back and rewatch from the first instance. What are tags, what are attributes, how to format, and how to create objects. Now I'm going to go over some examples. Now here I created a simple class thing. I'm gonna indent more so it can be easier to understand. Now here I created my class. My class is, say, the name of your global class. You could name this mod name or game name, because you can't do mods with XML as far as I know. You name it class 1, and the type, maybe you set the types thing here. Type is items. Now to add an item, you have to add an object, which is item. You specify the type here, which is passive, and you know the usual: a name, a description, and what you want to do. Damage. How much damage does the item do? It deals 3.5 damage, which is specified here, but you can add flags to it, so I added the flag explosive. It also has an effect, which is hooked into the main code as per usual. Now let's say this code is something like you can create like what it'll be. Sorry, something like that. And that's basically what that function would do. And maybe, I don't know, object dot effect dot class or whatever you put your code as. Now the timer will also run a function that will like run this effect every 60 seconds. You can imagine this is all pseudocode. I didn't code like a setup to make this work. This is just pseudocode. So imagine in your code you have a setup to take this timer and blah 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 blah. It should be straightforward still. Now another type active, item active. Now the same thing, name, description, and charges you want to put like charges for example. And the effect you target, say the opponent. If you're the player, you target an enemy. If you're an enemy, you target a player. Amount, all of them. Now this calls a function called plug ice, which say is here. And yada yada yada. You can imagine what happens here. I won't go over detailing every single thing. Now charge on another attribute. What you want to do, run this function with this source, this amount, whatever. And that's basically how this items class would operate. Now you have the enemy class, which is again my class, and the name is actually class 02. The type is enemies. You create an enemy, and in this case you actually use attributes. You use an attribute to say this enemy has this much HP, this is its name, the type of enemy is defensive, neutral, offensive, a mixture, whatever. You can add a velocity modifier. Here it's not needed because it's 1, so default. And you have an attack. You can have several attacks, as many as one. They have a weighting system and a scaling system. So the more they use the attack, the more it stales, the less they use it. Since he only has one attack, you don't need scaling. And here he uses a super beam, which was registered up here. So you can actually call stuff you already register in another class from within the XML, depending on how you set up your code again. It all depends on how you set up your code in the main file, or the source code, not the main file. And here we have another enemy with different HP, different name, and a different type. And instead he has 2 attacks. He still has a super beam, which it's rare to use and it stales more. And he has a basic shot that calls this function every time this attack is chosen. Now there could be more attributes here, like frame speed. Say this how often he'll attack, let's say once every 60 frames, something like that. You can be as creative as you want. Now I've already explained the basics of XML. Now with the basics out of the way, we should be starting into how to actually code an XML, an items.xml for example. So let's say here I have this items.xml file which follows what we just reviewed. It has the class item, the class name, sorry, with the tag items, and the attribute is gfx root to catch the png file and the version. Now this class has several objects inside, which are all of these little items. For example, this one has the tag passive, familiar, and active, or trinket, whatever. And each one of these has its own set of attributes. So what I'd recommend for doing when you're first starting is just getting the items.xml from the game, you can get it from the game. Resources, it is right here. All of the XMLs. Now, what I recommend is just grabbing this, copying it, pasting it on your empty file, and doing this. And there you have it, your own items.xml. Now you only have to change this. Let's say you want it to deal damage. You want this to be basic damage. You write the here. The ID is not needed, and the name will damage item. And there you go. You have your own little item in your folder. It's as easy as that. Now, as long as you don't strive too much from here, you can get an idea. There are several attributes. I won't go over all of them, but there is mainly the cache, which attaches to the main.lua file, which whenever you pick up the item runs the empty evaluate cache function, which in turn updates the cache. For example, what is this? Work uniform. Here, work uniform has a cache speed, so it runs this function because it's cache speed, and it updates. It's kind of simple to follow. Description is just the description of the item in the game, nothing too far of the ordinary. GFX is the item root, you know what it is, and the name, well, it's straightforward. Well, there's also soul hearts, if I'm not mistaken. I can check it in here. I can actually check all of them in here. There is heart, with red hearts you regain, max heart, which is red heart containers you get, and there's soul hearts, which is the amount of soul hearts you get from the item. There's also max charges, which is specifically used for active items. And sadly, there's no black heart or bone heart you hook here. Brittle bone should give you bone hearts, but it doesn't. There's also no black hearts. This is evil up. This should, yeah, there's no black hearts. So you want to add black hearts or soul hearts, or not soul hearts, black hearts, bone hearts, eternal hearts. Of that you need to use Lua. You can do it via XML. But that's basically it for the items, at least for the time being. Let me just recheck. Yeah. Then let's go to. Oh, I didn't copy over costumes.xml. What am I doing? How did I not copy this file? So we have the costumes.xml, which is pretty similar to this, except it's just costumes and costume. Now, this has a few attributes which are kind of whack. So there's the ID. The ID, you can attach it to an item. For example, here let's say this item's ID equals 1. Well, then when I get the item in the game, it will check this file and check for the costume with ID 1. So whenever I pick up this item in the game, it will give me this costume. Now the IDs, as you can see here, you can write whatever you want. They are not incompatible with our mods, so you don't have to worry about that. There's several other attributes in here. For example, there's priority, which just in turn makes your costume override others. There's also is flying, which makes your costume a flying costume. And there's a few extra attributes if I still have the thing here. I do not. Oh wait. No, I do not. So here, costumes.xml, there's a few more attributes. There's ID, and the anime 2pad, and the type. There's several types. There's null costumes, there's passive costumes, and there's active costumes. I'm not sure if there are trinket costumes. As you can see, there are a plethora of attributes. You can check all of these attributes on your own by checking the vanilla files. So there's, for example, priority, as I said, skin color is flying over bright colors. I'm not going to detail what they do because not even I do. I've just messed with a few of these attributes. I usually don't need to override colors or whatever. Skin also another one. Costumes are whack. There's not really too much to explain. And the last example I'll go through is, I know I have items pool here, but it's not needed. You can do item pools with the item pool tool, whatever thing. Is the entities. Now entities are a bit more complex. As you can see, they actually have an object inside, which is pretty meaningless, but it's like keeps whatever. So entities have way more attributes. They have the anim2pad, the name, ID, variant, subtype, base HP, boss, all of that. Now with entities you have to be extra careful because unlike items, entity IDs do collide in the game, so you can't just make all of your entities have the same name because the same ID as other mods, because they will collide and create a mess. And depending on how unlucky you are, you may even cause crashes. So you have to be extra careful when working with this. What I suggest is just using a random number generator and doing a threshold from within 300 to 4950, which this I think is a limit to variance. So you just get whatever comes from here. Let's say it gets 756, well you start here with 756 and then go 757 and so on. You have your custom thingy. For IDs, they are also pretty limited, so what I usually recommend is pick an ID that's going to be your mod. You can also do like a range from this and use that. Let's say it gives me, well, so these are really bad examples because all of these are pickups, but let's say this gives like 750. You just use 750 for all your variants, not variants, sorry, IDs, and you call this your mod ID. You use this for all of your entities as long as they are not effects, of course, because effects are always ID 1000. So effects are always ID 1000. If you go above 1000, it breaks. You don't wanna ever go over 1000. So that's why you have the threshold. I use 500 because Repentance probably gonna add new entities and fuck everything over. So just to be sure, use 500 as your threshold. And once you got this, you run the other thing, that's 300 to 49050. And there you go, you have your initial variant, you have your ID, which is your mod ID, and your initial variant, and you just go up from there. You keep your ID the same, and your variant you keep going one and one and one. So this will basically in turn guarantee you mod is as compatible as possible with other mods. And I think that's about everything I have to cover. I know it's a pretty bare bones tutorial. I mainly explained what XML was in general and not exactly for Isaac. But once you know how it was for Isaac, once you know how it works in general, you really don't need to understand how it truly works in Isaac, because it's super easy to understand once you know the basics. What you need to be careful though is it's super easy to crash the game if you mess up. 99%. Why did I close this file? Oh my god. Let's say 99% of the crashes are caused by an XML error. So if you, for example, have this entities.xml and say you wrote entity and didn't close it, you left it as entity instead of closing it, this is going to crash the game. You need to be extra careful when working with XML because any tiny mistake if you do that, or if you do this, or I don't know, you mess up somewhere, you delete this, something like that. If you mess up in the XML, your game is going to crash. So whenever your game crashes, there are two types of crashes. There's game init crash, which is always caused by XML error, and there's run init crash, which is mostly caused due to a Lua error. Now you have to keep this in mind. If the game crashes when you boot it up, let's say I didn't boot it up, if I boot it up right now, and it initializes and it stays on the initial screen and stays white and doesn't load and crashes, that's most likely an XML error. If you are on the menu and start a new run and it crashes on this screen, it's most likely a Lua error. Those are the main key components you need to learn. On init is an XML error, on a run start is a Lua error. And that's about it, I think, for real this time. Let me reopen the test.xml just so you can have a better idea. It's really simple to understand XML. Again, if you didn't understand, just go over my previous points step by step. I'm mainly here to explain how XML works. I'm not gonna go over every single vanilla or Isaac XML file and explain every single detail about it. That's up to you to discover and understand. And you can always just ask for help in the Isaac Discord. They're super active there and pretty helpful. So if you are stuck not knowing what to do in the XML, you can always leave a comment on the video or ask in the Isaac Discord, and I'll try to be as active as I can in both. And yeah, that's XML. It's not for Isaac, just an introduction to XML. I hope you learned something during this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed, even if you didn't learn anything, which I really hope you did, because if you watched the tutorial to learn and you didn't, then I screwed up big time. Hopefully you got some knowledge out of this tutorial. Or well, more than a tutorial, it's not a tutorial, it's just an introduction. My next introduction is going to be an introduction to Anim2s and how to animate with sprite sheets. And after that, I'm actually going to start for real the tutorial series. So stay tuned. I'm probably gonna be uploading the Anim2 tutorial soon after this one. I wouldn't say I would do the same for the first tutorial. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Again, hope you learned something, hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more introductions and tutorials, so you can stay tuned and keep learning. Follow me on Twitter because I post a lot of updates there about my projects and also new episodes. Join my Discord. I'm plugging a lot of things, but I join my Discord because I post also a lot of mod updates there, and my series is always posted there. I have a special role for people who want to keep in tune with the tutorials and my mods and whatever. But that's it for real this time. See you in the next episode.